let's start off and just learn a little bit about yourself. Why don't you tell us about your background? We kind of got some of the data, but kind of tell us how you got to this place.
Well, first I'd like to start by, you'll notice I am wearing purple. I
like that.
I'm a rabid college football fan, so, you know, go Frogs.
All right.
I've lived a nomadic lifestyle. My father was a career Air Force officer, so we moved around every 3 years for most of my life. Lived all over the world, Europe and in the United States, and then I spent 10 years in the military. And if you don't mind, can I just take one digression? Every time I have the opportunity to speak in public, I like to remind the audience, and a lot of audiences don't need to be reminded, but I do it anyway, that we are a nation at war. And right as we're enjoying this incredible breakfast this morning in this great town of Fort Worth, you know, we're a nation at war. There's over 350,000 men and women stationed in 130 countries around the world, 50,000 in Iraq, 90,000 in Afghanistan. Over 6,000 Americans have given their lives since October 1st, 2001, and 42,000 have been injured. And I noticed I did see a service member in the back, so I think we ought to give him a big round of applause and thank him for his service. So 10 years in the military, absolutely loved it, and decided the Harvard experience kind of created a bug to try to pursue a business career. So I left the military in 1992 and have been in business, several different businesses along the way over the course of the last 20 or so years. And again, moving, a rather, again, nomadic lifestyle, but I will say my wife and daughter are here this morning, and my wife is from Abilene, Texas. And she said, enough of being a tumbleweed. We've moved 9 times in 22 years, so we're thrilled to be here at Fort Worth, and we'd like to be here for quite some time.
Yeah. You know, all of us in our lives are shaped by people, or have our lives shaped, and our attitude shaped by mentors. And what kind of mentors have you? Probably had some both in private, in the military, but also outside. So who've been your mentors in life?
It's a great question. You know, first I'll start with my parents. My parents, both my father and my mother, were very influential in shaping me as a young person, especially my mom. My mom was an Air Force flight nurse, raised 5 kids, and had 5 kids in 6 years. One got her master's degree in nursing when we were all in high school. So she taught me the work ethic and hard work. Very, very challenging, tough woman, but also very compassionate. So my mom was a huge mentor for me. A high school football coach that sat me down when I was a junior in high school and said, hey, you're a pretty good athlete, but you're probably not going to be as good as you think you are, and you're not going to make a living doing it. So use your athletic ability to get the best education you possibly could. And so that was sage advice. And then in the military, I had several commanders that gave me challenging opportunities, and I had some success. And then in business, I've really worked for some great CEOs, and CEOs that, you know, established a pretty clear vision of what they were trying to do, were willing to take a risk on me as being a relatively young guy or not having the requisite experience, putting me in difficult situations and seeing, you know, what you could create for the company. So I've had a lot of good mentors throughout the year.
Okay. Let's turn and talk about Bell a little bit. And tell me about you've been at Bell for a while now, a little bit.
Seems like yesterday.
Yeah. What's the culture like at Bell, and what did you find when you got there?
Well, you know, I think Bell Helicopter, first and foremost, you know, Bell's been around for 75 years, and Bell really has helped change the way, you know, the industry has flown. And so the first thing that when I got there is, you know, I was really, frankly, thrilled, and I was humbled by the opportunity. Thrilled because it's an incredibly challenging industry, both in the military and the commercial side, the technical challenges, the business challenges. So a real thrilling opportunity. Humbled because we're the stewards of this company that for 75 years has done great things around the globe. And so I was humbled by that as I go around the world and I say, I work for Bell Helicopter. It's one of those brands that even outside of aviation that people understand. And so Bell's a very proud company. It's a very resilient culture. If you go back and study the history of Bell throughout time, there's been some challenging times and there's been some good times. And so it's a very resilient, very proud culture that takes the job that we do in terms of aviation very seriously. And it's very passionate. It's you know, on all elements of the business, there's a lot of passion for what we do.
When you look at trying to attract people. We're very grateful for the people you hire from TCU, obviously. And
some great Bell employees in the audience this morning.
Absolutely. We're very happy about that, and have some current students in our MBA program from Bell. When you begin to attract top leaders, how do you do that? How do you sell Bell? And obviously you have the brand equity, but what is it about Bell that makes people want to come to your company?
Well, one of the things that when I got here, Bell's this incredible brand. It's been around for 75 years. Is really to try to reattach the organization to this incredible business called aviation and vertical flight. And so we work with the team to create a pretty clear mission, if you will. One of the things that I learned in leadership, through the military is that people need to understand the direction you're going. And so one of the things that we've tried to do is to say that we're one Bell. We have to think of ourselves as one Bell, not a collection of fiefdoms within the different organizational structures, but one Bell. And we're focused on a mission that's basically changing the way the world flies by providing superior vertical lift and this is where it's the passion. What we do saves lives, preserves freedom, and we've got to find a way to do that in a competitive manner. We've got to provide our customers, military and commercial, an incredible value. So we focus on that mission. And the other thing I think that's important, and I'm a student of business and organizations, is we try to stress the concept of a foundational value element. If you go back and look at businesses or companies that get in trouble, they lack a foundational value set. And so we've got a value set of integrity, trust, respect, and pursuit of excellence. And we try to live that day to day, not make it a slogan on a wall, but in terms of the way in which we interact. And I think that attracts a certain type of people. And then the other thing is to create the opportunity for people to grow and explore and challenge people. We've got a former MBA candidate now that's working some projects for us in India. Linda's sitting right there. Linda came out of the engineering organization. We've moved her over into our commercial business. So giving people the opportunity to explore, to challenge themselves, to see what they can do to grow, and also to help the business grow and perform. So, and it's an exciting industry. I mean, this is an industry that's constantly changing. It's an industry that's incredibly complex, and so people that like intellectual challenges are going to be drawn to the business that we're in.
When you talk about it's an aviation company, is it a supply chain focused company? Is it a strategic management? What kind of company is it? How do you piece it all together?
That's another great question. Well, first, I subscribe to the theory that you've got to look at the company from the perspective of the customer. I subscribe to Peter Drucker's comment. What's the purpose of a business? The purpose of a business is to attract and retain customers. To retain customers, you've got to be able to do it profitably over the long period of time. So the perspective that I like to bring is to what is it that you have to do to provide value to customers. And so in our business, what's required there, not that dissimilar to other businesses, you've got to be able to provide some element of differentiation. Our solution has to be differentiated from the competition. And what that means in helicopters, because they're incredibly complex, is not just the upfront acquisition of the helicopter, but also the 20 to 30 years of support that helicopter provides. One of the things about Bell Helicopter, we've been through some ups and downs, but one of the things that's our strength, if you go back to the culture, is we're really good at taking care of the customer. For 17 years in a row, the industry's given us the accolades of being the best in our industry. And so I think about the business from the customer's perspective. What do we have to do? So are we a supply chain management? Absolutely. We manage 1.7 million parts in our machining center. So yes, is supply chain management incredibly important? Yes, but you also have to have marketing and sales capability to understand the needs of the customer. You've got to have an HR system, that works, that provides the talents, that we need. So at our core, though, and I think, we've got 2,500 engineers or so. At our core, we have to engineer and design an incredible piece of machinery to be successful. So engineering is central to what we do.
Core function, yeah.
Yeah.
All right. First helicopter ride, scariest helicopter ride.
No. Actually, my first helicopter ride was in the Army as a second lieutenant with a Scout helicopter, which is the current Kiowa Warrior. And there was a great article over the weekend. I encourage everybody to read it on Sunday about the Kiowa Warrior. But that was my first one. The scariest one was my only qualification for running an aviation company is I jump out of perfectly good helicopters. The scariest one was the first time I jumped out of a helicopter, parachuted out of a helicopter. That was a little nerve-wracking. But those are the two that I remember most.
Because, you know, like people always say, you need to really know your product if you're going to sell it well. So you got to do that.
Right.
Let's talk about leadership a little bit. And let's go back to West Point. Mm-hmm. And what did you learn in West Point? What did you take away from that experience as an officer? And then what did you bring then to corporate America from that?
You know, one thing that West Point stresses, and I think is right, is you know, leadership is really a holistic approach. You have to have the academics in that case, the intellectual curiosity to be successful. You have to enjoy in working with people. You know, so that's a big part. And then finally, the other part is the spirituality or physical nature. To be a leader in today's world, you have to be physically fit. The schedule that we keep, the hours that we keep, the continents that we go to. So I think leadership is that combination of all three. West Point was very clear, and the military was very clear about what is it that you're trying to accomplish. What is your mission? What are your priorities? How do you allocate the resources against the priorities? And then how do you measure where you are against those priorities? Those are some basic fundamentals that were taught there. And the other one I go back to, you know, it's a value that I have, you know, it's the Cadet Honor Code. Will not lie, steal, or cheat, nor tolerate those that do. And that's a foundational element for me that I try to bring every place I go, because without that, you don't have anything. And so I think those are a couple of things that, you know, that West Point taught me both the first time, and I will say the second time through West Point is a lot more enjoyable than the first time through West Point. Right.
So how do you impart those values? You've used that phrase, foundational values. How do you impart that in your leadership role with Bell? How do you communicate that to employees?
Well, we do town hall meetings and we do communications things, and I always start with the missions and values. I try not to preach, but just to use real life situations. If you take the concept of integrity and trust, and you're in sales, or you're in engineering, or you're in the manufacturing, if people don't believe you're a person of integrity, it's hard to do business with you. You can't build that element of trust. And trust is absolutely essential to be successful in business, because at the end of the day, there's a relationship between human beings that leads to a business transaction. And if that relationship is not built on a foundation, and I would argue in the defense contracting world, the reason we have all of that things in place is because it's a relationship that's built on mistrust. So I think we talk about those things. We try to hold ourselves to those standards day in and day out. You know, the old simple things. You know, before you talk about someone, have you spoken to that person? You know, simple things like that. And it's hard. We're 10,500 people. We're a small city, and so every day something goes on that we're very proud of, and every day something goes on we're not quite so proud of. And so we try to illuminate those things. Now, one other thing I will say that is culture related, I'm a zealot around safety. You know, we produce aircraft, and I've always been, you know, in my military training, the importance of safety and this concept of attaching, you know, we can be really good at safety, that nothing that we do is worth anybody getting hurt over. You know, that's a leadership value, and if you preach that, if you provide resources to ensure that objective can be achieved, then people start to buy in, they start to believe in the things that you're doing.
Do you stay, when you see Bell Helicopter, your vision for the future, if you will, do you see Bell being who it is today? Do you see it diversifying? Are you going to be Bell Helicopter the way you are now? 10 years, how do you see the future? Well, you know, one thing that's absolutely true is if you don't change and modify with the world that you compete in, you're going to get lapped. And so, you know, the status quo is not an option. You have to, you know, the world requires that we continually change. So from a Bell perspective, we're really focused on a couple things. Number one, we're going to make the investments to grow all three segments of our business, our commercial business, our military business, and our customer service and support business. Because if you look at the history of Bell over time, it's that balance, because we're really in good shape right now on the military side of our business. But when you look out 5, 6, 7 years, we know where military spending is going to go. It's going to go down. So we have to have a commercial business that provides us the opportunity to grow on a global basis as that turns over. And so, and then that, going back to that
at differentiation, really focused on how do we provide differentiation to the customer. What is it that the customer, the military customer, the commercial customer, the aftermarket services and support customer is looking for? And then the other part that's really important for us, we're here in Fort Worth, you know, it's our center of gravity. We've got 6,500 folks or so here in Fort Worth, engineering, manufacturing, principally our corporate offices. But we compete in an incredibly competitive global world. And so we have to improve our responsiveness and our global cost competitiveness to win. We're competing against, in the global world, frankly, in some of the segments that we compete in now, we're the last U.S. manufacturer in those segments, competing against two very large European entities that are, in one case, 30% owned by a government, and in another case, 25% owned by a government. So we're against some very, very steep, tough competition. So we have to use the culture to our advantage. We have to be more nimble. We have to be quick. We have to recognize opportunities ahead of our competition if we're going to win. And finally, we've got to execute. You know, going back to the customer, when we tell a customer you're going to do something, we're going to deliver on that commitment to the customer. So over time, we're going to be more global. The industry is global, but the growth is really in places like India, places like China, places like Brazil. Opportunities for growth in that area, and then we have to find ways to win the next big competition, which is in 2030. It sounds like it's, you know, decades away, but in our world, that's just around the corner as we compete to replace the existing vertical lift platforms that are in the armed forces today. So a very challenging time ahead, but I think a very exciting time ahead for Bell Helicopter.
I want to open it in just a moment for the audience to ask questions. One of the things that I'm really pleased, in fact, thank you for your opening comments about our servicemen and women around the world today. You know, I think we still face a problem. I think as our young men and women come back, not always young men and women come back, opportunities for them. And is Bell doing anything to take a leadership role there to help us think through?
We are, in terms of our talent and talent development process. We've got a very active program for veterans. Right now, over 25% of the employees at Bell Helicopter served are veterans, and so we take a great deal of pride in that. And I think you're right, all of us have to look for opportunities for veterans, wounded warriors, veterans as they come back, because, you know, one of the things that it's hard for us to understand, we complain about traveling around the world and fatigue and so on and so forth, but the young soldiers and airmen and Marines today, you know, they're looking at 3 and 4 deployments abroad in combat zones in a 6 to 7 to 8 year period. And that operational tempo is just incredible. So yes, we are actively pursuing opportunities for veterans. And, you know, the Bell Helicopter Armed Forces Bowl, you know, the reason we do that is to thank the veterans, the active duty members, and their families, because the other thing that we forget about is the stress that these constant deployments place on the families. It's intense. And so, yes, we're trying to do more, and I'd encourage all of us in the region to look for the opportunities for veterans. Less than 1% of the people serve, and they enable us to do the things we should do. So I think we should help to provide them the opportunity.
Yeah. Let's open it to the audience. Any questions you have? A lot of topics we've touched on. Yes?
Are you planning to compete in the competition with the Air Force?
Yeah, the CVL SP program, yes. We weren't pleased they tried to go sole source, so we decided that we'd at least give them an opportunity to think about a couple of things. So yes, we will.
Can you tell us a little bit about that, or what's?
Well, basically, it's 93 aircraft plus or minus that are actually existing UH-1 and November model UEs, and the primary mission is they move people and resources around a lot of the missile silos across the United States. So Air Force has been a Bell customer for a long time, and we're going to see if we can't keep them a customer. So we're going to provide them a couple different alternatives.
What can it do for Bell jobs and money-wise?
You know, it's all those new programs mean, you know, jobs, but it takes time. You know, that program, you know, it could be 3-4 years before they ultimately avoid it. In terms of our strategy, I believe we can be successful as a U.S.-based manufacturer in the aviation industry. And so the center of mass here in Fort Worth is our engineering and corporate headquarters, but frankly, more importantly, is our manufacturing center. So this is where we manufacture our dynamic components, And so as we're able to win more business, that keeps the jobs that we have here. Our military assembly center is up in Amarillo. That's an absolute fabulous world-class facility. And then we have a commercial center in Maribel, Canada. And so we're North American based. We do supply chain around the world. So it's hard to say total job numbers, but it's important for us to win these things so that we can maintain the job. We're having a job fair here coming up in town. So we actually are one of the organizations that has been hiring through this tough economic period of time.
Yes, Dimitri?
Talking about jobs, can you speak a little bit about offsets and what foreign governments require offsets?
Vern, would you like to give a dissertation on offsets? Offsets is a very complex topic, and it's not the same, and frankly, it varies by individual program and individual countries in terms of what's required. If you take India, for example, India had a very, very restrictive offset policy and program that basically prevented anybody from really competing because the requirements were so onerous there was no way you could ever get a return on the investment that you were making. So in this case, India has relaxed some of their offset requirements now that allows somebody like us to go in. In the case of India, we're leveraging engineering resources here, but also engineering resources in India as an example of offsets. We'll use some of the manufacturing base that they have there for programs in country and to export out. So every country has some form of offset requirement, and it is part of the complex nature of the businesses that we do. And they change over time. India is a great example. You know, they put that onerous offset in place and nothing happened. So they finally realized after a couple of years they needed to change it. So every country has offset requirements and they vary. And our job is to figure out how we can meet the needs of the offset while still earning a return for our shareholders and, as we go forward. So it's a complex subject. We spend a lot of time on offset, and because it impacts your strategy, especially around your engineering strategy, your manufacturing strategy, and your intellectual property. The other issue that you face as you compete in a global world is your intellectual property and intellectual property protection. Huge strategic issue for us, especially when you think about places like China. Right? You know, how do you protect that?
Here in the academy, we worry about producing the next members of the workforce in other countries. And it is written about a lot that there may be a shortage of engineers and young people, young men and women especially, interested in majoring in engineering and science. Is this something that Bell worries about? Is this something that Bell participates in?
The question's about a shortage of science engineering students and how's Bell thinking about that?
Right. Well, yes, it is something that we're concerned about because there is a shortage of engineering talent in general. We're having success attracting engineers. Bell, before I got there, started a program that we're building off of. It's called Boot Camp, where we go around to certain universities around the country, and usually they're juniors in college, and we invite them to come for basically a week-long boot camp, and we work them from 6 o'clock in the morning till 2 a.m., and they whine about it, and then I say, well, you stay up all night drinking beer, so you can, and so we do boot camp, and then we do, if they're successful there, we bring them back from internship, and in most cases, we'll have interns for 2 to 3 years, and so in the ones that are very successful, we'll provide them an offer prior to in many cases, to the start of their senior year, and then we'll bring them on board, and we're hitting at about 98% of that group on the engineering side. The other thing that Bell does is is that we invest in our people. So for the Neely School of Business and the MBA program, the executive MBA program, that's something that we think that helps the individual, it helps the executive, it helps the company. So that's an investment that we're willing to make. And then we sponsor, there are several schools that specialize in vertical lift engineering, and we have fellowships at those schools, and we sit on the boards. Jeff Lowinger, our EVP of engineering, actually sits on the engineering board here, as well as Penn State. So we're active in the engineering schools and supporting those institutions to go forward. But overall, as a nation, yes, we have a shortage of math, science, and engineering skills. And there's other countries that are investing very, very heavily in math, science, engineering skills, India being one. And it's that the competition in the global marketplace is only intensifying. It's, even in the time that I've been doing it, which is a brief period of time, the last 20 years or so, the level of competition in the world is dramatically increased. And so it is incumbent upon us to work and to be competitive, and math, science, engineering skills are absolutely essential. We also work with local high schools and support some programs there as well. So yes, it is a strategic issue for us. If we can't have the best talent on the field, you're not going to win. I mean, I know that's cliche, but it's true. So it is something that gives us a lot of time.
You know, as we think about, I have to preface this by saying I'm very bullish on this country. I think we have an incredible resource base here where things are going to be fine down the road. Having said that, there's no question we're facing some real challenges in our country with respect to national debt, with respect to some of the entitlement challenges coming ahead. You know, as we begin to, if we were to put on the table, you know, all those things that we're doing, whether it's in support of national defense, support of the entitlement programs, incredibly large expenditure at the federal level. Do you have suggestions about how do we begin to think about that? And that's a hard question, I know, but how do we begin to do that? It really and truly, I don't want to say bipartisan, in a nonpartisan way. Let's just figure it out.
Again, I'm wading into the political arena, which I try to avoid. But I think it starts with an honest and frank dialogue of what the real issues and problems are. Just like any institution, if you don't lay the issues out there and have a frank dialogue about the implications of those issues, I think people won't confront it. So that dialogue needs to take place. I am bullish as well, but I also believe, because not the fear, I see the opportunity, but the concern that I have is as I travel around the world and you see the world wants what we have and they're willing to work hard to get it. Right. They don't want to take it, they want to earn it. And so the debt overhang's a major issue. You know, at the end of the day, it's going to be a combination of both, right? You're going to have to reduce some of the entitlement programs. That's unequivocal, and you're going to have to do something on the revenue side. Now, that's on polar opposite sides, but those of us that are pragmatists, you can look at the problem and say, you know, Stockman had a pretty good editorial this past week. I think it was in the Wall Street Journal or New York Times. I can't remember. You know, basically laying it out that says we have to address this issue. The fact that the dollar, we compete, and on one side it sounds good, we're a US-based manufacturer, so a cheaper dollar helps us to be competitive in the world. There isn't a nation in the world that's devalued their currency as a long-term competitive advantage. Right. Just, sorry, that doesn't work. You know, it helps me in the next quarter, but long-term, that's not a good thing. So I think the problems are solvable. It's going to take some leadership. And sometimes when you're a leader, you got to make unpopular decisions.
And I think it really, that phrase that you used earlier, foundational values, I think is important. And I hope we find, if you will, statesmen in, you know, not in any particular party, but in multiple parties that come together and deal with it. Very difficult situations, I think.
And again, I'm an optimist, but I do concern, you know, my high school daughters here. You know, what are we leaving to them? Absolutely. Because we're leaving this incredible debt overhang that they're going to have to take care of in a far more competitive world than we operated in. Right. That's not good. Right. So we need to get after that.
Yep. Other questions? Yes.
What specific policies and procedures does Bell implement to encourage innovation in the organization?
Policies and procedures around innovation. Well, we have an X-Works. It's kind of our Skunk Works opportunity, and Linda was down there for a while, and Jeff. So we're reinvesting, you know, on that side. The other thing that we're doing is, for a long time, Bell thought we had to design every single component and every aspect of the helicopter, of the machine. And so one of the things now is we're looking to partner with other organizations where we bring our expertise and their expertise together to a more innovative solution that gets to the marketplace quicker and faster. And so as we apply resources, our engineering resources, some of our resources are devoted looking out 10 to 15 years on what's coming over the horizon. We work with universities on that. We work with some of the government labs and agencies there on cost share and co-share type projects. Then our investments come in a little closer for what we can put on an existing helicopter, and then near-term engineering investments around the products and services that we have. Now, the other thing that I challenge our folks about is innovation is not just about technical innovation on the machine. Innovation and process improvement is around how do we go to work and how do we improve every single aspect of our business every single day, that constant improvement. The culture that says that I'm engaged in what it is that I do, and part of my job is not just to do my job, but to figure out, to be innovative and find how can I do my job better. Because in this globally competitive world that we compete in, we have to find a way to produce more output with less input. Otherwise, we're not going to win. And so we try to encourage that concept of the engagement, continuous improvement. So innovation is not just around technical innovation, incredibly important to our business. It's also around innovation of policies and procedures. How do you simplify? How do we improve that responsiveness and rapidness to the customer as we go forward? So those are the types of things. We have awards. Textron has an innovation award program that's the board of directors provide every year. Bell wins several of the awards every year, so I'm pleased to do that. So we have recognition, and that's compensation and recognition. And then we hold our innovation councils in Bell and award prizes on that as well. And again, it's across the business, not just the technical innovation side. So those are some of the things that we do to stimulate the innovation, within Bell and within Textron. Chairman's Award for Innovation is arguably probably the highest esteemed award that you can get within Textron. And that's, we provide those every year. And it's business and technical innovation.
Yeah, it's because it's interesting to think about. When I think about Bell Helicopter, when most of us think about it, we don't think about a nimble company. We think about, somebody who's producing these big, heavy apparatus, right? And yet you're talking about process improvement, which enables you to stay and become more nimble, and that's really.
It is, that responsiveness and cost competitiveness is absolutely essential. Yeah. We're behind in a lot of areas, especially in the commercial space. The competition has surpassed us in certain areas. And so if you're going to take that ground, you've got to be able to, outthink, outsmart, outmaneuver them. And one of the things is around speed. And it's a challenge for us. Aviation industry it's a long cycle business. It's a slow process. And trying to find ways to make that fast and maneuver quicker is a major challenge for us, but that's at the essence of what we have to do.
What about environmental concerns? Do you look at recycling issues?
Yeah.
And what do you do with that?
We have a very active, actually, we're building a new cafeteria. It was built in 1952 when P.D. Chabet, who's sitting there in the front row, that's when P.D. started. And all of our new buildings, or any of the new buildings that we're building now, are LEED certified, and so we're pleased with that. We have a energy management program where we actually set goals for actual energy wattage reduction every year, disposable material reductions each and every year. And we do work with a lot of hazardous chemicals in our manufacturing process. Mm-hmm. And so we've got a very active program around what can we do to our manufacturing processes to reduce the need for the hazardous chemicals in our manufacturing process. So given the nature of the work that we do, the environmental side is very, we have an EH&S group and focus, and that's something that I review on a monthly and quarterly basis in terms of where we stand. So it is something that we do take very seriously.
Now, the helicopters themselves are long-lived, hopefully, with that. Do you design, or trying to design for, if you will, recycling, disassembly at the end of life, or is that?
No, it's basically designed and for flight performance and durability, reliability, and flight performance, and that's what Bell's been noted for a long, long time. So they get plenty of use. The Bell 47 still, the first commercially certified helicopter still flying. So right. We've got aircraft around the world that are 30, 40, 50, 60 years old. So.
PD?
Tom, for all of us that worked at Bell for all the years, what's the update on B-22? What's happening with the Osprey?
The question is, for all the folks that worked at Bell for years, what's happening with the Osprey? And I'll tell you, PD, that goes back to the resiliency and tenacity of Bell Helicopter, in this case the Marine Corps, to stick with that program. The visionaries that saw the capabilities of that aircraft and all the hard work that's gone on for years is paid off. And it's paid off incredibly well. You know, this notorious V-22 that's an unsafe aircraft, that's not true. The facts are that that is the safest rotorcraft for the last, at 100,000 hours of operation of any rotorcraft that the Marine Corps has in their inventory. So that this concept that it's unsafe, yes, there was a horrible accident in 2001, absolutely. But since that time, the issues have been corrected and it's operated as the safest aircraft in the Marine Corps inventory. The other thing is, I think you saw here a couple weeks ago where there was the first CSAR operation, a rescue of a downed pilot since Bosnia. Well, the fact of the matter is the only aircraft in the world that could have performed that rescue mission in the time that that rescue mission was completed was a V-22 launched off you know, the ship by the Marine Corps. That isn't even a Marine Corps mission, but the Marine Corps was there, had capability for the V-22, could scramble the forces and get the pilot back on deck before any other force was even capable of starting the mission, let alone completing the mission. So for the visionaries out there with the V-22, all your hard work is paid off, and we'll continue to improve the aircraft. But it's doing amazing things around the world, and the Air Force has them, and frankly, it's doing things that we don't even get the chance to talk about or to read about on a day-to-day basis.
Yes?
How do you manage and price risk?
How do you manage and price risk? Wow. Great question. Okay. The first thing is, because we're part of a publicly traded company, there's a delegation of authority down from the board of directors down to my boss, our chairman, down to the business unit heads like I am. So there's a formal delegation of authority that basically does it on risk elements, types of contractual risk, and dollar amounts. So that's cascaded from the board of directors down to the businesses on those two elements. So we try to assess risk, business risk for the most part, technical risk, and then we have delegation of authority of at what level does that decision need to be made. In aviation, risk is in the engineering design standards, really tried to design out, I mean, we go to 10 to the minus 9th. So on the engineering design side, you're trying to design it to, you know, zero failure. And as an industry, we do a pretty good job. On the big risks that we have are defense contracts, and duration of defense contracts and pricing, because they're asking us to take some long-term pricing risk. You know, what are commodities going to be 6 or 7 years from now? So those are bigger risks. In the commercial space, we have an opportunity to reprice a little bit more frequently, so our price cost risk is not as great as it is in some of our longer-term military contracts. Now, in those, there's share lines. So we spend a lot of time at the executive level. We have what we call our executive leadership team that brings together all the cross functions of an organization. And we have a gate review process with the team that's working a program or a major project will take us through the elements of the gate review. And one of the things that we're trying to identify, and one thing that's in a gate review, is a risk cube that talks about the likelihood and the severity of the risk, and we quantify it. And then for those that on the upper right-hand side, the red risk, if you will, we put in place definitive action plans to address those elements of risk that we're concerned about. So it's something that's, I would call it a fairly rigorous process that we have. And at the end of the day, though, that's what we get paid to do, is to manage and take risk and do it prudently. So the things we do are not without risk. There's no question about that. I would say on the technical side, we get it as close to zero as you can. On the business side, we're taking risk every day and making some significant bets, because one of the things about helicopters is they're significant investments. Average development cycles 7 years plus or minus before you produce the first aircraft. Trying to forecast what the market looks like 7 years from now is a little tough when sometimes we struggle about what's it going to look like in the next 90 days. So it's a fairly rigorous process that we have.
With technology moving so fast, how do you deal with the obsolescence? Since you have a long cycle system,
obsolescence becomes an issue even with a new design.
Yes. And obsolescence is a real issue for us, especially on some of the older designs. Even in the case of the V-22, we deal with obsolescence on a day-to-day basis. And so some of it's around more, and the obsolescence really is more around the electronic side of the technology. The dynamic components, that's not the issue. The issue is more on the electronic side. And so moving to more open architecture is a big thing as we go forward, because to anticipate what the market's going to be like 20 years from now is very difficult. So again, we have an obsolescence review board by program, and they're looking out and forecasting, working with our supply base, what obsolescence do you see, and what can we do to design around the obsolescence? And V-22 right now, we're working on that. It's a new program. We're still in production, but yet we're facing near-term obsolescence issues in the next 3 to 5 years. So it is something that we have to manage very aggressively, and we do that both on the military side and the commercial side. But you're right, it's a big-time challenge, and so moving towards this concept of not trying to design everything ourselves. At one point in time, we used to design every black box on a helicopter. Well, in a world that's changing rapidly, you can't do that. And so partnering with other suppliers that bring that to the marketplace, that are constantly evolving their open architecture, their structures, helps us eliminate that. But it is something that's a major issue. Every month, every quarter, there's an issue with a part or something that's no longer being made, and there's an aircraft down somewhere in the world that we've got to find a way to get that aircraft back flying, and it's a result of obsolescence. So it is a significant issue for us.
Any questions? I've got one more.
All right.
For you.
You ask hard questions, though.
Yeah, I know. What can I do?
It's the teacher in you.
What can I do? Yeah, yeah. Talk about engagement. What I've really noticed, I've gotten to know quite a few Bell employees, obviously, and they like where they work. These ones I know. What is it about engaging employees at Bell? They're happy folks. And what is it about that? What do you do? How do you approach it? Why does it seem to be so successful?
Well, I was watching some of the video from your previous guest and talked about the importance of engagement. And I absolutely subscribe to that theory that to be successful, to be competitive in the marketplace, you have to have an engaged workforce. And one of the things, and that's across all the businesses that I've been part of, when I came to Bell, we did an engagement survey, and frankly, I was kind of stunned at the overall level or lack of engagement. We were going through some tough times, and so one of the things is to survey, to get the information out there, and to acknowledge that there was an issue, and to then seek feedback from the employees of, okay, what is it that we need to do to address this issue? So we created, it's the BET, the Bell Engagement Team, and throughout all levels of the organization, and we collectively got together as one of our goal deployment process. One of our priorities, actually, was what are the steps that we're going to do, the actions that we're going to take to drive an improvement in the overall engagement level of Bell Helicopter. And so the engagement team came with some high-level plans. We cascaded those down to the different, within the different groups of the organizations. We have the ability to measure how well we're doing or how well we're not doing in the different groups, which then enables us to go back and to adjust. But the concept of an engaged workforce is incredibly important, and that's the other side. Is I also believe, as I tell my team, is that most of us have to work. So what the heck? And most of us spend more time, more waking hours working than we do with our friends and family. So what the heck? You might as well enjoy yourself while you're doing it. And so we try to have a little fun. A simple thing, and PD can remember being there. We used to have 200 helicopters that left the ground, flying helicopters that left the ground in the height of the Vietnam War here. And you've got some longer-term employees that we don't have in the Fort Worth area. We don't necessarily have aircraft that fly away from they make all the components, but we realized they had lost touch with this incredible machine called a helicopter. So we had to reattach, bring helicopters in, sponsor the air show, invite 5,000 employees out there with their friends and families so they can see what it is they do. When a V-22 comes in town, we have an employee group that goes out there. We take employees to the HAI show, the big helicopter show, so they can see what the competition's doing. They can see how we stack up against the competition. So all those little steps to build that momentum And we're making progress, but it's not, you can't ever relax on that, because as soon as you relax, you get beat. So I subscribe to the theory and that engaged employees are absolutely essential to be successful. I mean, if you just look at the labor strife that, you know, the airline industry, for example, has, it's hard to be competitive when that's the environment that you're working in every day. Right. So we're trying to create a different environment. Are we always successful? Absolutely not, but we're working at it.
Very cool. Other questions? Well, I want to thank you. Bell Helicopter has obviously been a great Fort Worth company for a long time, and will be for a long time in the future. And it takes great leadership, and we're glad you're here. And Abilene is a great place, but we think Fort Worth's a better place, and we hope you're here for a long time.
As I said, there's a tumbleweed that's rolled up against this big fence called Fort Worth, so we'd like to be here for a long time. Just a funny story, 22 years ago, we left Texas hauling a U-Haul with an S-10 Blazer, and 22 years later, we actually met here in Fort Worth, my wife and I, Janet. We came back into town hauling a U-Haul trailer. The only difference was I was driving a 7-year-old Lexus instead of a 10-year-old Chevy, but we're great. We're pleased to be back.
Thank you very much.